All right, hello once again. This is Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College, and I've been going over the PowerPoint presentations for Murox ASP.NET 4.6 with C# 2015, 6th edition. And I'm up to Chapter 13 of our textbook, and the chapter is entitled How to Use SQL Data Sources, and it begins on page 441. So let's get to it. I do want to mention that I don't have the time nor the inclination to be typing in all these problems that are in here for the chapter, so I'm going to use the ones that have already been provided by the author. And you can get these also, and I will show you how to do those, just not right now. Okay. So, here are our objectives. Describe the use of a control parameter for an SQL data source. Describe the use of templates with a data list control. Describe the use of the eval and bind methods within the templates of a data list control. Describe the additional code that is generated for a data source that can update a database. Explain when you might change the data source mode attribute of a data source from its default setting of dataset to data reader. And finally, explain when you might want to store the data that's retrieved by a data source in the cache's memory. So in this chapter, we talk about the SQL data source control. The data source control lets you access data from a relational database with little, or in many cases, no code whatsoever. We'll also talk in this chapter how to use the data list control, which lets you create a list of data that is retrieved by a data source. All right. Now, we talked about data sources back in Chapter 4, but now, for lack of better words, we're going to kind of go nuts with them, explode, and talk about it in a lot more depth and breadth of coverage. When you create a data source, it goes on your screen and it looks like this. I will mention that although you see it there, it is an invisible control. So you see it there, but when you run the program, you don't see it whatsoever. All right? In this case, the data source is going to be bound to a drop-down list that will display all of the categories in the categories table. All right, and we'll have a select statement that will retrieve the data in the select property of the data source control. You'll see that as we go on. Now, this connection string that you see right here, this provides the information necessary for you to connect to the database. Okay? In what we see right here, this connection string will be stored in the application's web.config file. When you create a data source, you've got your choice. You can do what's shown here, where you save it into the web.config file, or you can literally key the value right in to the control itself. The recommendation is that you save it in the web.config file, and you save it in the web.config file because if you ever need to move your project from one server to another or whatever, you're moving it along with you and you don't have to worry about resetting names and the like. Now, when we look at this, notice what we have. It's an SQL data source control. So there's the start of it. There's the end of it. And in between, we've got the ID. Remember that all all server-side controls must have an ID and must have run at equals server. So I think rest of the stuff in that top line there, that should make sense to you. Then afterwards, we've got connect string equal, and you'll notice there's a connection string there that's inside of double quotes, and it's inside of a less than sign, percent sign, dollar sign, and it ends with a percent sign greater than sign. In most cases, you're going to use that kind of syntax because, again, that will make sure that your connection string is saved in the web.config file. And we'll talk about that a little bit more, okay, in just a couple minutes. Now, there are a couple other properties that can be put on there. All right. One is the provider name, which is the name of the .NET data provider that's used to access the database. The default is system.data.sql client, so you normally don't put it in there. The last one is the select command, which is the select statement executed by the data source to retrieve data. So in this case, you can see that we're grabbing the category ID, the long name from categories, and we're ordering it in ascending order based on the long name. Now, you may or may not remember this. I'm not going to bring it up right now, but back in Chapter 12, way back on page 421, we looked at the different tables that are in here. The categories table has only a category ID, a short name, and a long name. Notice that we are selecting all three of those. The category ID, we are selecting two of those. The category ID and the long name. Okay? We can select any one, any two, or all three. So those are the basic properties that I just mentioned to you. When you go in, and quite often what you end up doing, and I can show you this, I've brought up the project for Chapter 13, and I'm hoping that I don't run into those errors. This is not looking good right now. All right. But when I bring this up on the screen, let's see, here's my default ASPX file. If I get an error here, this is not going to be good news. Well, that's good. All right. If we do that, and if we go into design mode, that's good too. There's the SQL data source right there. So if I want to bring in another one for whatever reason, it's under data, and I just literally sit and drag in an SQL data source. And I can drag it anywhere. So if I drag it right here, notice what I get. It turns blue, and it asks me if I want to configure it. So I can click here, or I can click up here. All right. And now what it says here is, okay, what data connection should you use to connect to the database? All right. So if I put in a new connection here, notice this is what we mentioned before. This is our default for our data source, and we don't need to change that. But we can come in here and we can look, browse, and try to find what database we want to connect to. Well, we want to connect to our project, and in my case, the project is on the C drive. It's under Muroc. It's under ASP.NET 4.6, etc. Student download, book applications, Chapter 13 product list. All right, Chapter 13 product list. And probably, I'm hoping at least under app data. There it is. So if I click there and I click open, that's all I have to do. So that set it all up for me. Now, I've got my choice here. I can use either Windows authentication, which is recommended, or SQL Server authentication. If I use Windows authentication, then the person who is logged into their account using their Windows login and password can now get to the database. If I use SQL Server authentication, then I can add another username and another password if I so would like. Since we will just be working on our own machines with our own stuff, we will always use Windows authentication. There are also advanced things that you can set in here. One thing that we may want to be leery of is what is called our data source. So I'm going to copy that for right now. And if I can test the connection, and it'll tell me, and it says the database file is not compatible with a current instance of SQL Server. Well, that's not good news. It says to resolve this issue, you must upgrade the database file by creating a new connection, or you must modify the existing connection to the database file. Not sure exactly even what that means. All right. In fact, I'm going to grab all of that information. Let me do two things here. Start up Notepad, bring up that actual data source, which is right there, and that's the default. And also, come on, I want to grab, let's just do a screenshot here of that error. And I'll save that into a Word file so I can look that up later. All right, so that's the error that I have to worry about. That's right here. In fact, I'm going to send it out to our printer here. So if you hear something in the background, that's what it is. I'll have to take a look and see what that is. It says, do you want to upgrade the database now? Yes. All right, well, that's good. Now it looks like it took it. I go to next, and it says, all right, do I want to save this connection string? And if I do, it'll go into this file right here. So I'm going to say, and I'll save it as Halloween connection string. Just in case it's in there, I'll make it Halloween connection string 2. Click next. Now it says, what do you want to do with that data source? So what we did with the previous one was we selected the category ID and the long name, those two fields. Had we wanted to put some kind of condition on there, we could have clicked where. We're going to get into that in just a couple minutes. Had we wanted to order it, and I think we do order it by long name, so we can sort it by long name. And you can see that it is building the select statement for us right here. All right, we click next. We can test it, and then it'll show us this is the information we're getting back. And you'll notice that it is in alphabetic order based on long name. All right, click finish, and it's done. Okay, so that's that data source. Nothing big there. Now, let's see that after I made that change, if I can actually run this program. No. Could not load type .default. Darn it. Well, this is not good news, because what that means is I probably am going to have to key in all of these programs, and I don't know when I'm going to find the time to do that. We'll work around it. All right. So I may not be able to do a whole heck of a lot going on here as far as showing you things. But when I drag that out, and I did it fast, when you drag out a brand new SQL data source, it's going to ask you what kind of file you want, and it will default to a database file. That's the one you're going to want virtually 100% of the time, at least in here. All right, you saw this. Now, when I didn't do this, but if I had clicked on this connection string, it would have shown me everything that's in here. So you see the data source, and you can see right there it says local DB, MS SQL local DB. Well, that should look familiar to you. Local DB, MS SQL local DB. That's the default. All right. Attach our database to it, which is the Halloween database. Put in the basic security that you get with a database from Microsoft, so set that to true. And if you cannot connect to the database within 30 seconds, timeout. All right, and that's what all of that stuff there is saying. All right. So I showed you this where I added the connection. Had I clicked in the box here to change, these are the ones that you can set. Again, ours was set to Microsoft SQL Server database file SQL client, which is the one right here. I have never seen it set to either anything other than these two. This is Oracle database, and I believe it's been deprecated. In other words, it's not being actively supported anymore from Microsoft. This is Microsoft Access, which is kind of a stripped down version, a cheesy little database that you can use if you have relatively few users. And I probably am doing it a disservice by calling it that. ODBC is Open Database Connectivity, I believe it is. And you can use ODBC if you're using, for example, things other than a database. So if I wanted to hook up a spreadsheet, let's say, or if I want to hook up a database that's not one of the ones shown here, I believe I have to go through ODBC. If you check the button right there, or you check the checkbox, I should say, then you're never going to be asked this. So if I set it to Microsoft SQL Server database file and I check this, always use this selection, I'll never be asked anymore. That'll become the default. Again, if I check this right here, that saves it out to my web.config file. I did not show you that, so let's look at it right now. All right. There it is. I guess it wasn't in there previously. Now I can break this up over multiple lines. It's not going to hurt anything. But I believe that this is supposed to stay together. So there was our connection string that you saw I created. There was our provider name, which was the default. This was our data source. You saw that. This says this was the file that we wanted to attach to it. Notice that it uses ampersand quote there instead of an actual quotation mark. This was the path to our Halloween database. All right, ending our quotation mark, our security, and our timeout. Okay? And if we did not check, if we did not go in and check that right here, then instead of this being shown right here as it is, right now, if I go back here and I go back to my program and I click on the data source, all right, and I go into my data source here and I go to connection string, it's there also, I guess. But it would be there, but it would not be copied into my web.config file. All right. You know, it is, and I don't know, but it is possible, it's possible the reason that this didn't previously work, I'm going to try just for the heck of it, is what, it's not impossible that this could have some kind of a read-only access because I'm grabbing it from the C drive. So let me go over to my C drive. C:\Muroc. And that, and let me just grab the entire book applications and let's just copy it here. Not going to be a small process, I'm sure. 6,305 items. It's not impossible, though, that the reason that this is screwing up has something to do with that. All right, I'm almost at 20 minutes, so while this finishes up, I'm going to stop lecturing right here, and I'm going to pick it up talking about, I showed you that connection string already. This is the ASP.NET code, etc., so I showed you that. I showed you the dialog box for defining the select statement, and let's pick it up with adding this where clause. So that will be picking it up on page 452. And I'll be back with that in just a couple.